Welcome back to another episode of the Entrepreneurial Family Man Podcast. Relationships. Relationships.
Touchy-feely. Oh, no.
You got your Kleenex box out. Let's get into this, huh?
Well, we are being transparent here, aren't we?
Intervention.
Yeah, right.
I'm Chris Niemeyer here with Chris McCluskey, Michael McGreevy, and Jamie Slingerland. Today, we are going to talk about vulnerability and trust in relationships.
Is this the Entrepreneurial Family Man show, or is this a show about women? Because isn't that something that women do? Vulnerability and trust?
Lord.
No, hey, we are just back for another episode. We're guys who are crazy about our lives. We love our kids, and we are entrepreneurs who want to thrive in business. And all of those are important to us. We want to talk about all of them in the context of our whole person, our whole life. Today, we want to unpack this pretty weighty issue of relationships and vulnerability and trust that's needed, which are two key ingredients when you have relationships. So, guys, I don't even know where to start on this one because, boy, this is not a topic that most guys want to unpack, is it?
No
Not
way,
at all.
man. Guys want to have a pissing contest. They want to measure whose muscles are bigger, or who can throw the farthest, or how
Or
much.
who can
bench.
crush a beer can on your head, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, this is not a place where guys start. That's for sure.
Well, Chris, this whole thing of being two key ingredients in a relationship. I'm looking at those words, vulnerability and trust, and they're scary. It's super scary.
Was that me, Chris, or was that him, Chris?
Chris's, all of y'all's.
All the y'alls.
Well, no doubt. I mean, we're talking about making relationships better. And if you're going to do that, and you mean real relationship, like intimacy, honesty, transparency, those are the two key words, vulnerability and trust. I mean, we do a lot of reading of different genres of books and all, but Patrick Lencioni is a huge name in the business world. Over and over again, he just emphasizes that trust trumps everything else in the functioning of a business or a ministry, or take it all the way down to just a marital relationship or any other kind of relationship we're in. If there's not trust, you really don't have the foundation upon which anything else richer and truly better and stronger is going to be built. And yet trust requires vulnerability, transparency. And that's why we're joking about how scary this really is. Wait. You mean in order to have good relationships, I've got to be known? I have to deeply know another? Maybe I don't want this intimate thing so much.
Well, especially for us guys, we want to be impressive. We want to be respected. And vulnerability doesn't necessarily feel like it translates to respect.
It just seems so much easier to schedule a poker night with a bunch of guys. I got my band of brothers. We play poker together and pass around chips and drink beer.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in like a fantasy football league, that's like your group of guys, right? I mean, you're close with them. You talk a lot. No, this is really about dealing with some of those life issues, those deeper issues. And I think, point number one we're going to talk through a little bit here is leading with vulnerability, getting others to buy in. And frankly, guys, let's unpack this a little bit together here, where maybe we've seen some examples where that didn't work well, as something to say, you know what, that's probably not the best way to do it. And maybe some examples that have for you. So Chris, what's something in your mind that has lended itself well to becoming a more vulnerable or trusting more with other guys in your life?
Well, it's a pain point because it's a very painful season of life and relationship for me, but it's not very hard to look back to it. I think on it frequently because it was such a kind of a, bomb dropped in your life type season. A guy that I thought I had real relationship with. In other words, there was transparency, there was intimacy, there was honesty. It was certainly coming from me in regard to my interactions with him. But there was the day when he crashed and burned. And I mean, everything came out, and we're talking, newspaper write-up and busted with all kinds of illegal stuff and tawdry sex stuff. And you're just like, wow, who even is this person? And his response to me when, it's glaringly apparent that I have never known who this person really was, he said, McCluskey, you're saying like that I crashed and burned here, but you can't crash and burn when you haven't even gotten off the runway. I never even started being known. From the time I was a child all the way up throughout my whole life, I've never been known. I wouldn't have wanted all this stuff to be known, but I never even got off the runway in what you're talking about thinking you had here in relationship. Sorry. And I mean, he was tearful, he was apologetic, but it was at least honest at that point finally in saying, no, we never even actually got started. I went through the motions. We had what appeared to be connection, but relationship, honesty, vulnerability, transparency, no.
Yeah, I know I've been a part of some scenes where this was almost it was almost manufactured, like in the Bible study arena, where I used to help lead a men's group, and we would go around from person to person and say, okay, share something from your week. And we were expecting all this deep connection, but we found that you can't really manufacture that sort of thing.
I have an unspoken that I want to have you guys pray for.
Yeah.
I want to be vulnerable. Listen, I would never share this with anybody I don't trust.
Yeah, exactly. There's actually another extreme that happened in this as well. One of the guys in our group decided one day he was going to dump this major, what would you call something like that?
Bomb?
Hand grenade?
Torpedo?
Vietnam War, they had those bouncing buddies. It could have been one of those.
Gosh, anyway, a bouncing Betty. So anyway, this guy who showed up to our Bible study, who we really didn't even have a deep level of trust and intimacy with, just drops this bomb on us about this poor decision that he made in his life. And it was like really, really bad. And he was almost doing it so he felt better. So it was like off his chest and he didn't have to deal with it anymore and he could move on. He actually kind of stepped away from the group after he dropped that. And I think he felt like the weight lift off his shoulders and he was free of it in a sense. And we were just like, what the heck just happened? Like, that is not real vulnerability. It's not based in trust. It was odd, just really strange.
Yeah, that's an example of how not to do it for sure. Jamie, what about you, man? In terms of other guys in relationship, I mean, I look at you as a guy who's super relational, personable, and I know that maybe that's been a journey, but
you forgot to throw good looking in there.
I mean, that's just like an unspoken, right?
Unspoken.
I'm the guy who's looking to go deep with other people, and I think maybe I've overshot that with people that aren't looking for the same thing. My experience has been, I don't want to just go around in a Bible study and do unspokens or say something that we could all just share what we want each other to pray with. I want to live life deeply and know the context and help people out with the real struggles they have. And so that's always been kind of something that I'm balancing. Like, I want to be involved in a church group. I want to go to church with my family, but I don't want to go through the motions. So you can go and worship at church and you can be a part of a corporate body, but you can also have maybe a smaller group of guys. Nothing's off limits because you've earned that with them. And you have that. You kind of live life organically and just together with those people. And so that is something that I'm long to do with other guys.
Yeah, that's
persons who you sense are safe enough and who care enough to where being vulnerable with them, risking their trust, is worth the potential gain for both of you.
That's a great point. And it really is that kind of mutually beneficial relationship, right? I mean, I remember, and you guys both mentioned, church. So I'll kind of go back to an example of mine where, when I was kind of figuring out what it exactly was I believed in and kind of walking my faith journey, I remember, years and years growing up in the church and being part of so many that it was like, you see people on Sunday and they're smiling, they're all dressed to the nines, and how are you? Good. And that was it. Versus at this point in my life, it was getting around some people that were like, they saw you at church. It was, hey, how you doing? The guys would almost intentionally just be super honest and say, man, I kind of felt like I got punched in the gut this week, and here's how something went. And man, and this gets to our point, because they led with that, then your barrier of trying to put up this facade was pulled down, because you went, oh man, good. This is a safe place. This is a safe person to talk about how, you know what? Yeah, my week actually wasn't good. And here's why, and getting into a group of guys like that, where, I mean, we were almost intentionally misfits, in the body, because we were struggling with different stuff. And it was a sweet place to go to share that common connection of, we don't have it all together. We're trying to figure this life out, and we accept each other for who we are and all the stuff that we've had to deal with. Man, that was huge for me in opening my eyes to how leading with vulnerability gets other people to buy into that. I mean, what's that been like for you guys? An example in a relationship where you've maybe led with that vulnerability, or seen someone lead and shared some of your own insecurities, your own struggles, your own challenges, and it gets people to break down those barriers.
I have an example with McCluskey on here that I remember being in the super intimidated in the 48 Days group when I first joined. Chris, you just told me it's all right. The Jamie that you are when you're just yourself and you don't have it all together is the person that everybody likes and everybody respects. A burden kind of lifted where I didn't have to perform and be that poser. That was good. Thank you for saying that to me, McCluskey. I
remember that conversation. I can picture some in my mind's eye. I think we were standing out on the gravel driveway just talking about it afterwards, and you were saying how hard that was. And I wasn't blowing smoke, that's for sure. I was affirming, not only are you free to be yourself, but I think I took it further and said that's good for this group, because everybody in there doesn't have it all together, not a one of us. And if we don't have some kind of a catalytic presence in there from somebody who's willing to say, oh, yeah, me? No, I definitely don't have it all together. I got a lot more questions than I got answers and all. Then we're going to all just go in there as posers and kind of go through the motions and, beat our chests and do our war cries. And it's going to be a mile wide and an inch deep. And that's not the depth that I think any of us were signing up for. But the thing that facilitates the kind of depth we were looking for is the kind of transparency that you were showing forth.
I want a group of guys where I don't have to be something that I'm not.
Amen to that, man. I think a lot of us guys live in quiet desperation. There's like this huge battle going on within us, and it's too painful or too hard to share it openly. But if we did, we would, first of all, find all these people who get it and maybe even have been through it before and understand what it's like and can walk with you through that stuff. But as long as we hold that tight to the chest, it stays there and it builds and becomes a big monster.
That's the power of that kind of transparency, isn't it? That it's not just that it deepens relationship and, oh, isn't it nice to have relationships? It's that we're all fighting battles, and two are better than one. Right? I mean, Scripture's just so clear in urging us to journey together, that iron sharpens iron. We're to be in relationship. And if we're fighting something like that friend that I was telling you about at the beginning, it's not that we didn't have conversations about inner struggles that men have in sexuality and purity and the temptations that are present and all. It was just that he chose to keep everything at a superficial level when those topics were introduced over and over and over again. I mean, for crying out loud, he knew that I was a Christian board-certified sex therapist. That was my profession. You guys know, I mean, sexuality comes up with me like talking about what we had for dinner. It's just a topic. But we have to choose to embrace the vulnerability that's required to admit, you know what? I'm really struggling in that area if we're going to have any meaningful conversation that could help us in our battles. Otherwise, we just walk away still solo in the battle.
I like what you're sharing here, though, about, really we're kind of giving up this posturing that guys do. And that, Chris, you just mentioned being superficial. It's so easy for guys to just kind of sit in that top level, superficial nature. And Isn't it so ironic that we're so connected now in our culture? We are a connection away from anything and everything, and yet suicide's at an all-time high. Antidepressants are at an all-time high. I mean, we are so isolated, even though we're quote unquote connected. And I think it's just this idea that as guys, boy, if we're able to lead with those kind of conversations where, you know what, it's been a good week, but boy, something rough happened here with one of my kids, or our marriage is kind of like this week. And boy, I think that just invites other men into that conversation where they can be more transparent. And then you have that equal footing of just, hey, let's hash this out together because I care about you. You know, that's what this is all about, is to know and be known by one another.
Chris, let me challenge you to share a story that you were sharing with us before we hit record here. You were talking about the earlier self, the earlier Chris Niemeyer back that you've talked about here sometimes in the episodes.
I was definitely that maybe stereotype Sunday Christian, right? Who was there and you can kind of go around and, hey, how's it going? Oh, it's going great. And you know, that idea that I've got it all together, everything looks good on the outside. You know, I had the awards, had the list of stuff, you know, in my background, but boy, on the inside, I knew I didn't have it together. I knew I was searching for meaning and purpose, and this kind of intimacy that we get to share on a relational level. I didn't have that. But it's so easy as guys to just put up that facade, put up that front, and just say, I've got it all together. Everything's looking good on the outside. It was tough. It was a tough few years to battle through that.
It's funny. It seems like we're protecting ourselves. It seems like a wise thing to do. Like, you know, I dare not put that out there, of course. And in fact, it's the single worst thing we could do. That posturing and positioning and putting on a good front, but not really being known. It means not only are we not known by others, we don't even know ourselves anymore. We get lost somewhere and you just start living a total lie. Everything. I'm not speaking to you directly, Chris, just any of us. We all can relate to that. You know how easy it is to slide on an image and just project that to the world. And people will go ahead and interact with it. I mean, they're not thinking about us nearly as much as we might think they're thinking about us. We need to be. And boy, when we can look in the mirror and recognize I am not being authentic with anybody, I'm just going through the motions. There has to be a place of ownership where you recognize, and that is killing me. It's not wisdom. It's not a smart move. That doesn't mean I need to go out and share my stuff with everybody. But I better find some people that I can be real with, because I don't even know who I am anymore.
Chris, very well said. I'm thinking right now, somebody is thinking, that is so risky though. What if I start to unravel myself? I'm more open, more authentic with who I am. And what if I get stomped in the mud because of that? What if other people feel how I feel about myself, which is I just dislike how I've ended up or what's really going on under the surface? I mean, that feels really, really risky if I'm a guy that is holding back in that way.
There's some truth to that, Michael. You can be wounded. You got to be careful not just to be that guy like the one at the Bible study who goes out there looking for it and misbehaving.
Yeah, you know, you bring up a good point, and that's kind of another point here that we want to talk about and address is some cautionary notes about maybe some unsafe people and some characteristics about them and who you might want to just proceed with caution, right? In terms of what you share and who you share it with. So let's unpack that a little bit. What are some characteristics of other kind of guys who maybe you shouldn't yet be vulnerable with?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we keep referencing scripture and church things here, so I'll put a scripture verse out that everybody's familiar with, and that is, don't throw your pearls before swine. And it may seem a little odd at first to apply it here, but I think it applies very well. We're not saying that these people who are not trustworthy are swine. Swine, as Jesus was using it there, were seen as an animal that was ignorant of understanding the value of pearls. A swine is not capable of understanding the precious nature of a string of pearls. So the onus is not on the pig to treat those pearls differently. The onus is on the person who owns the pearls to not put them out there. Because if you do, it's going to get trampled, Mike, just like you were saying. It's going to get trampled underfoot. It's going to get chewed up. That's what pigs do with things. They just do. So if we've got something precious, even a black pearl, if you will, metaphorically, a black pearl, something that is very, very vulnerable, a broken place in us, a secret battle that we have. Think of that as a pearl. And yeah, don't throw it before swine, but do bring it and lay it down before those who would care and can be of value in helping you to figure out how to address it. Kind of just a first basic principle there for us. I think about trustworthiness. Trust is something that is earned, and you can't just assume you can trust anybody and everybody. Absolutely, we can't. We shouldn't. We would be foolish to just go ahead and put my stuff out there because I heard a podcast episode where the guys were talking about being honest and transparent. No, that's going to be very dangerous.
Yeah, and I shared, earlier, one of those types of people was who I used to be, right? One of those kind of people are those that you just feel like, oh, they've got it all together, and so that's the kind of person who is just not going to be willing to go far, to go deep, to be vulnerable. Michael, you've got an example of maybe even yourself and what a characteristic might be like.
Oh yeah, I mean, putting myself in this position of I am the authority and I'm the expert here and I'm going to speak to you on what you need to do. So like positioning myself above another person as if you can do that, and comparing to myself to other people. And this happened in my coaching business. Like I would say, okay, I need to feel like this is what was going on really inside. I need to feel like I'm a competent coach. I need to feel like I'm an effective coach, and that people perceive me as a professional and someone that can offer value. So I'm going to position myself in this place of I'm the authority, and I'm going to be the one that administers all the value that this person needs. And meanwhile, not thinking at all about how this person might be receiving that or how they might feel. And really what some of my clients at the time were feeling was judgment of, you need to do this and you need to do this and listen to me and like submit to me almost. And man, I'm still learning about this, but that was me almost sabotaging the opportunity to facilitate the growth that they needed to experience.
That's a good one. You're not alone in that, Michael. I think that a lot of guys would even maybe default to that a bit in terms of being able to sit and judge, because it's just easier and it's safer to sit in that judgment seat than to be the one sharing, right? Mm-hmm. Jamie, what about you? I mean, what's a characteristic you would say, boy, this I would be careful about?
Sometimes when you find somebody that you think might be a good person to build a relationship with, you start sensing that this person is almost sizing you up. You had this sense the person has a big wall that's 8 feet thick. They're not going to let you through it. You got to find somebody who wants to reciprocate. And so as you're being vulnerable, they can empathize and open up with you a little bit. It shouldn't just be somebody who you feel is that judgment piece that Michael talked about. I've had that issue with people that I really got hurt because I wanted that person to be somebody that I could have a deep relationship with. And I ended up realizing that they have trust issues and that's their defense mechanism of keeping themselves safe by positioning themselves over me.
Jamie, I think even a variation on that same thing is that some people, they may not show forth that really thick barrier of unapproachability or something, but instead might kind of go through the motions, saying some of the right things, but you sense that they're not actually working on some of their stuff. They're avoiding any kind of personal responsibility. They do, some apologizing or clarifying or qualifying or whatever, but they're not actually intentionally working on themselves. So the best you would get in there is, they'll listen, they'll talk, they might even patronize you with some feedback or whatever, but you're not going to have a mutual relationship of iron sharpening iron because they're not engaged and willing to work on their own stuff.
Exactly. But we need to make sure we're not doing what Michael's guy in the Bible study did to them and they're just being mature about it. It's like if we're struggling here to be vulnerable, I've done that too a little bit, put foot in my mouth where I'm giving too much and the wall's going up probably on their end for good reason, right?
I think one of the most important things is what we thankfully enjoy here in this group of the four of us is that you recognize you are with others who are painfully aware they're on the journey. They are not done. They've not achieved any kind of a pinnacle of anything, and they're not simply stuck and sitting there and complacent in not working on self. They are invested in growing into everything that they believe God's given it. Everything they've been called to, everything they were created for. I think that's where all four of us, and I know we've got a fifth seat pulled up here for the person who's listening and identifying. When that's the case, those are the people that you seek out and say, okay, I think this might be a safe person. I'm going to choose to be vulnerable and take a risk. And then, of course, trust, like I said a moment ago, is something that is built over time. You can't just hand anybody trust. Trust is earned. Trust can be lost very quickly, but trust is earned. The most you can hand somebody is the benefit of the doubt. I don't know if I can trust you in this new relationship yet, but I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and act as if this person's very trustworthy, and I'm going to give some degree of transparency and vulnerability, and we'll see over time if not only do they keep that confidence and do they show care and concern and pray for me and ask me about it later on, but are they mutually then owning their own stuff and reciprocating, bringing their stuff to me? Is this a potential iron sharpening iron relationship? If so, great. Our intimacy, our trust is going to grow and deepen over time based on what we're doing.
And wrapping up here too, and just giving people the benefit of the doubt. If you're listening, who is it in your life? What friendship could you look to start that conversation, to build the bridge over that moat to their castle to get to? Guys need deep relationship. We need this camaraderie, and yet it seems so hard to obtain. But I think if we've talked about anything today, it's trust and vulnerability can start with us leading that conversation, opening someone else up. And so we just ask you, which of your relationships you might be holding back on? What could you do to open that up, to be vulnerable with yourself, to identify maybe some of those people in your life that you could go deeper with, that you could open up with? Trust yourself to take that action this week in relationships. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, come and talk about this with us. We've got this private Facebook group that we're actually intentionally posting these kind of questions. What challenges are you working on this week? What issues are you addressing? We're not a bunch of guys who are just saying, hey, just post your wins only. We really want to know how you're walking life and to do that with you. So head over to efmlife.com, click on our private Facebook group. We'd love to have you involved in that conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Entrepreneurial Family Man Podcast. Visit efmlife.com to connect with us and others like you who are pursuing success in enterprise, family, and marriage.
And relationships.